Hi everyone. Ma'am, is it okay if we start now?
Yes, sure.
Uh, I'll read out another question. Mm, to what courts in Sri Lanka can we present cases where the salaries of people were deduced as a result of this corona pandemic?
Okay, so there is a possibility of producing those kind of matters in front of labor tribunals. They are not essentially a court as such, but labor tribunals are generally regarded as a setting in which there is a how do I say more of a leniency towards the employee. So you're talking about employee matters. I think it would be best that you forward such matters to the labor tribunals.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And sometimes I see that media is exaggerating the problem that people have and recording them without their permission. So isn't that a violation of human rights?
It is. The issue there being our people are also not necessarily well educated on what our rights are. So we don't know. We can object very directly if we are being photographed or videoed without our permission, which is why this issue arose after people started getting videoed when they have contracted the virus. There was a social media campaign saying if they come to sort of take a video of you, just object because you have the right to do so. And if you object, they never do it because they know that you know about your rights. So it's mostly a situation of not knowing. When that happens, because you're targeting a private entity, you're not going to be able to file a case against the state as such, because the state cannot bring up such restricting laws to prevent the media from doing certain things, because the freedom of expression is very, very broadly interpreted. Okay, we saw even with regard to extremely um, problematic situations concerning religion and freedom of expression in the global structure also. Nobody wants to bring an expansive law to cut out freedom of expression. So that is going to become a problem. But you can file a case against the media entity, if you will. That could be, I don't know, maybe defamation charges, maybe a privacy issue, depending on how it was portrayed. So there are many avenues to go by in a situation like
We have two more questions.
that.
This one says, can we sue China for the virus?
Yes. No, I wouldn't think so, because a situation like this is, I think it's something that can happen in any country. I was thinking this afternoon also, it happened in China this time. It may originate somewhere else, because the Spanish flu originated somewhere else. It didn't originate in Spain, it originated somewhere else. So these kind of pandemics can arise in different parts of the world at different points of time. And I don't think there is any point in sort of trying to sort of bring up an argument that we can sue China for it. I think President Trump would like that idea very much. But if you're going to do something of that nature, I'm assuming you would have to look at the International Court of Justice. And I don't imagine in my wildest dreams the judges in the International Court of Justice ever adopting a situation like that. Having said that, because there is the conspiracy theory that China may have constructed the virus, that it didn't arise naturally, that it may have been done in a lab, if at all a situation like that arises, then there can be a difference in the situation. But these are all conspiracy theories. We don't need to engage with that. But as of now, it's nature born, and there is no possibility of filing a case against China.
Here. And the next question is something related to labor and human rights.
Yes.
Can an employer force their employees to face PCR tests before entering the office or a particular construction site? And can they maintain quarantine centers for the employees and force them to get quarantined and face PCR prior to report to the work? This is happening in some construction site maintained by Chinese.
That's the thing. So if it is relevant, and if there is a threat in that particular cluster, I don't think that needs to be looked at as a compulsion as such, because it is being done for a particular purpose. As regards the maintaining of quarantine centers in employment centers, that is possible, and we saw how over the world even frontline workers and healthcare workers were living in isolation because they had a higher tendency of getting exposed to the virus. So, in a situation like that, that is not possible to directly call it a human rights violation unless, of course, you can show that you have been exceptionally targeted and there is no reason to impose such a restriction on you. So if it has been exceptional like that, then yes, but in a general standard, I can't say that it automatically becomes a human right violation. The Chinese worker situation, of course, that I think was initiated by the Chinese government itself, not the government of Sri Lanka. So that was something that was done by the Chinese government as a gesture of friendship, I'm assuming. Okay, but of course, there is a possibility of challenging any of these decisions because nothing is hard and fast, nothing is written in the rocks. Okay, so if there is a possibility if you want to.
And the next question, if this is human intervention, is there anything we can do for that from the law side?
If it is really proven, so it's going to be a criminal case in that situation, and it's going to be a case against China and the other states. So in a situation like that, there probably is an avenue of looking at it as a threat to global peace and security. But it's very difficult to say at the moment because so far global peace and security has been defined and understood in the international law also as an armed conflict kind of threat. So this is very, very different. So we will probably see a whole set of new laws and new interpretations coming up in a situation like that. So if it is human intervention, that is one aspect that you need to think of the lacunas in the international law. And the other aspect is because it is a criminal charge that you're bringing, you will have to uh, ensure that you prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, even at the international law level. Okay, so there is a lot of proof that will be required. You will have to identify who the first patient was, and the first patient in a situation like this is called patient zero. And tracing back to patient zero is going to be extremely difficult. And there was a study that came out a couple of days ago using satellite images. There was an attempt to establish that the Chinese hospitals in the Wuhan area were overcrowded even before Chinese government admitted to the virus. So they're saying that it broke out somewhere in December, but the satellite images are apparently showing somewhere around August. So there is a question as to whether the virus arose beforehand and whatnot. So any which way, satellite images and images like that would not be enough to establish that there was human intervention. So a lot of proof will be required to establish that if that's the case.
The final question, what is your opinion on the right to health and access to healthcare? This is regarding how certain countries did not treat certain people, saying they are too sick or haven't paid for the healthcare services.
Yeah, so my opinion is that I'm more towards, I like the economic, social, and cultural rights. I have a passion for the basic rights of a human being as well. Civil and political rights are also a passion, but I think that these need to go hand in hand. So health is a basic right. And I think that states should adopt measures like ours to have a good public healthcare system. And ours we can praise at the moment because we haven't capped the limit. And in most of the countries, what we saw was a capping of the healthcare facilities. And why the world in general hasn't thought about it is extremely problematic. There was a speech that President Obama gave a couple of years ago before he stepped down from office, where he's talking about the need for a separate unit to handle pandemics. And that pandemic related entity in the White House of the United States was dismantled as soon as President Trump came into power. So probably we need to think about leaders who are visionaries, who can see that we are not ready for a situation like that and what status we need to put in. So you asked about my opinion. I genuinely believe that there are certain aspects from which we can take out some funding. There is a global overemphasis on how much money we need to put into military and defense kind of approaches. Maybe there is a possibility of rethinking this. Maybe there is a possibility of rethinking how much money we spend on space studies and use that kind of money in healthcare facilities. I don't know where exactly we can draw the funds, but there is a huge need to use the funding in healthcare facilities.
There are two more questions.
Yes, definitely.
In the senior stage of COVID-19 patients are in trouble to breathe themselves, so some sort of machines should be connected to them in order to allow them to breathe. But this issue is most of the hospital. But the issue is most of the hospitals have a very limited amount of such machines, and it's really problematic to choose whom should be given artificial respiration and whom should not. What's the state of human rights in this aspect?
So human rights doesn't really say that one person's right, one person's life is more important than the other. There is no rigid calculation method in the human rights stream. We saw that there were allegations even against Italy saying that they were prioritizing young and healthy people for access to ventilators and basically cutting out some of the older people. But we also saw from Italy itself that some of the older people were getting cured. In Sri Lanka, we didn't have this issue because we didn't cap out, as I said earlier as well, cap out our maximum. And right now, also, I think we have one patient who is in a serious or critical condition. So we have been able to sort of take care for now. So the human rights approach is there is no um, direct mechanism of establishing who needs it more. Probably it will have to be a healthcare approach, the doctors deciding which patient needs it more at a particular given point of time. Sometimes an older person may be able to survive without the ventilator, whereas a younger person, younger, healthy looking person may need it. So I think for now, it's going to be a healthcare decision and not for human rights to determine.
Thank you. And the next question. This is the last question.
Yes.
What is your opinion about Sri Lanka protecting human rights comparing to other countries?
So I would say it's something like this. We also have a broken track record, and I cannot think of any country in the world that has an extremely unblemished kind of a record. Unless, of course, you start pointing to countries like Switzerland, Norway, and there are questions about how they generate their GDP, also whether they are involved in weapon manufacturing, whether that's one of the aspects that you need to consider is something that I have often personally thought of. So, in certain circumstances, we have protected human rights, in certain circumstances, we have not. And I think what is important for us to is for us to be knowledgeable about what our rights are and be concerned and be able to raise those concerns, because the moment that we lose our right to sort of raise the concerns about the rights that are being violated, that is the first step to violating all of the other rights that we may have. So it's important to have freedom of expression, it's important to have the right to protest. And of course there are questions about how do you protest and for what. These are political and politicized to a certain extent as well, by the protesters themselves, maybe by the government sometimes. But these are issues that all countries are grappling with. I'm not going to say that Sri Lanka has had a brilliant record of protecting human rights. You can take a look at the Supreme Court determination of how many torture cases we have and how brutal some of those torture related situations are. So it's a learning curve, and Sri Lanka has put in place very recently, some they have been in progress for a long time, sensitization mechanisms also. So, for instance, we have courses for the commanders of the armed forces where we sensitize them about human rights, where they are taught how to engage with general public, especially to police. We have courses on how they should not torture people, how they should respectfully handle people. And you can sometimes say, okay, even if those courses are there, we still see certain people being hit and handled in a very bad way. We saw that with regard to the protest. We saw that with regard to a child who was on the autism spectrum. So these are some very real questions. But I can guarantee to you, if you can raise these issues in a court of law, the judiciary is going to be looking at it from a very human rights approach, let's hope. Okay. If the judiciary does take a human rights approach, the officers who violated human rights would definitely be in trouble. Apart from the case kind of approach, apart from the law itself, the police departments in Sri Lanka also have different guidelines about how they give promotions, how they recognize the services of police officers. So those who have done human rights courses and those who have attempted to make some sensitization in their aspect are given priority when they're getting promotions as well. So you could perhaps think of developing a stronger incentive structure. You incentivize people rather than penalizing. Okay, you kick out from the job if somebody has done something wrong. You make sure that the police department itself take an action about it. So these are some of the mechanisms that you can use in terms of ensuring that the police and the military don't violate human rights when they encounter people in situations such as this. Tiniti, I can't hear you. You're muted.
Sorry. Uh, that's all. That's all. Uh, uh, I don't think there's anyone who wants to pose a question. Uh, yeah. Uh, and thank you so much, ma'am, for motivating us on about this topic, and also thanks so much for spending your valuable time with us.
You're very welcome.
We are honored to join with you today, and thank you everyone who joined with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.